Hello and welcome to the Inner Compass Guide podcast with me, Liz Scott. We're a social enterprise and our vision at the Inner Compass Guide is to support communities to thrive by unlocking natural resilience, kindness and connection. And we do this through our Wellbeing listener programs. We're often asked by our participants about the big stuff in life when it comes to wellbeing listening. People might say, well, it's okay to listen for well-being in everyday situations when someone is feeling a bit sad or a bit anxious. But what about listening for well-being when someone's got a real problem? For example, what if they're seriously ill? Does listening for well-being work then? Well, my guest today, Sarah Tyers, was diagnosed with malignant melanoma when she was 32 years old and had a 6-week-old daughter. She's experienced numerous treatments, scans, and surgeries. And in her life, it was a very, very tough time. And I was really struck when I read Sarah's website because she says in that, in the early stages of my disease, I was suffering with depression. Eventually, when I was seriously considering the irony of suicide with cancer, I realized I needed help. Well, Sarah now is teaching people about emotional resilience. So I just want to welcome you, Sarah. Hello, it's lovely to have you here with us today.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
So for someone that's so bright and shiny, and I'm just having read that you were very depressed and at one point considering suicide, it looks like things have really shifted for you. So tell me a little bit about your story and cancer and its relationship with you. You pick where you want to start.
It's such a long and winding tale. It's always really hard to sort of pick a little point in it. But that moment of realizing that I could ask for help or that made sense was like, it's almost funny looking back at it now. I was writing the other day about this time period and I remember looking at my daughter and she was just over 1 when I was diagnosed as stage 4. So with skin cancer, it's often seen early because it's on the skin, but and if it's cut off then you're normally pretty good. But for some people who are unlucky, it does spread. And I was one of the unlucky people for whom got another tumor and then another tumor. And then they scanned me and found various tumors throughout my body, and that was the point that they then do drugs and things. But I remember looking at my daughter around that time and just wanting to love her, just wanting to feel all the magic that everybody talked about with young children, and feeling like, what if I only have this time? What if I do die really soon and I'm not even enjoying it? And so, I mean, you can just hear in it, you can hear the pressure that I was putting on myself to be feeling something that I just wasn't. And I remember really, there was a number of really pivotal points, because it always looks like people just change on a dime, but there was so much build up. But one of the pivotal points was sitting watching her, and my brother said to me, what if you don't have to look after her? And it was completely out of the realms of my imagination that I, as her mother, could take a day off or even a moment off. And he said, I'm here, she's fine, she's playing. Just for a moment, can you imagine for a moment not looking after her? You don't have to do anything. And something in me allowed me to put down everything I thought I had to do for my child just for a moment. And in the moment that I put down all of those ideas I had, I was just filled with this desire to look after her. And it was just the most incredible moment of seeing what I was doing to myself. All of this pressure, all of this, and it was pressure that I was building for myself because of what I wanted, and it was so innocent. And I was torture. It was day-to-day torture, feeling like I had to do this thing. And parenting went from being like pushing an elephant up a hill to pulling a piece of string. It I got into the flow of it instantaneously, because somehow I could stop thinking all of the things I was thinking about looking after my child.
You see, I think this is really interesting, and I love what you're saying, because there's something, and I know that this is going to be a theme during our conversation. There's something, isn't it, the difference between going through this heavy mental sort of pressure of thinking things need to be a certain way and trying to make it happen that way, and then I'm going to call it a very natural energy that comes through, where we feel more in the flow of life and how life is turning up. And so I can really see that with your daughter, and in that, at that stage. And what about with the cancer? Because I guess when you've been diagnosed with cancer and you're living with cancer, there must be a lot of mental energy around that too, about what you should be like and how you should be, and there must be a lot to manage, I guess.
Yeah, for me, I one of the things that I talk about, and so I went through a lot of permutations with my thinking around cancer. One of the big things is because I had a build-up in disease, like my disease progressed over time. So it was like, oh, you're going to be fine. Oh, maybe you're not. Oh, you really might not be. I was really scared when I had the first mole diagnosed, and I didn't let myself be. So I got on the bravery bandwagon. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I was really isolated because I was living in the States at the time. I wasn't around my family, and my relationship with my husband was really bad. So I didn't feel like I had anyone I could talk to about being scared. And so I just was brave. And I kept being brave. And it was like pushing down the feeling of being scared. It wasn't feeling empowered and courageous and in line with life. It was, I mustn't feel that. I mustn't feel that. There's no need to feel that. Feeling that is silly. All of that kind of thinking around that feeling. And as it got worse, there was a point where it was legit for me to be scared in my mind. Something got to the point, I think it was, probably was I asked my oncologist, what if the drugs don't work? And she beat around the bush and she said, well, give or take with your disease progression, maybe 12 months. And I was sitting there looking like I look now. I didn't look ill. There was and it was like being hit in the face. It was such a shock to know that I was that ill. And something in that allowed me to feel scared. Suddenly there was a reason. Suddenly it sort of legitimized my feelings, although they're always legitimate. But I let them out. I let myself feel really scared. And what came through, I didn't stay scared. I felt really scared. And then I felt like, okay, then what? And it was just this complete sort of relief of allowing myself to feel what I felt. And because I felt scared, because I let the emotions, I let myself feel what I felt. I saw then what I was scared of, and I was scared of dying, and I was scared of leaving my child. And then I saw that she would be okay. If I did die, she would be okay. And there was something really powerful in just accepting that fear as a part of me, and not needing to push it down anymore. That was one aspect of it. Another aspect of my relationship to cancer is I was brought up. My mum was a homeopath, and my dad's always been very into lots of spiritual teachings. And a lot of what I was brought up with is that things are you know, your body is a part of your whole being and the mind-body connection. And when there's a problem with your body, it's probably something emotional, or all of that's connected. And I believed that, but at the time, I took that to pile more pressure on myself. So I had to be okay. Because if I wasn't okay, it was my fault. And that's one of the things that helped me identify the language that we use around cancer being unhelpful, because it was such a big part of my process, was to feel like I should do something about being ill, and it was on me to get better.
Well, I mean, that's a double whammy, isn't it? It's almost like it not only is it on you to get better, but also it was on you that you got ill in the first place, because there was something you weren't doing, and however you might interpret that, being positive or whatever, that had you become ill in the first place. And you know, I suppose in a way, what that shows, that what you just described there, is probably intensified for you because you were going through such an intense experience. But I guess it's, in a way, I'm just thinking more broadly, it's almost like a very human thing, isn't it? We often put it on ourselves that we don't feel well, or we get ill, or we should feel better, or, like you said, suppress those emotions. I mustn't feel that, but I must feel brave, or I must do this, or I must put on a good face. There's a lot, just even imagining that, there's a lot of a mental and emotional energy we put into almost forcing or trying to fit ourselves into something that we're not. That's what I'm hearing and what you're saying.
Yeah. And that's to me what I want to change for other people, what I want to talk about broadly with the world, is changing the way, is helping us identify the difference between feeling genuinely good, feeling genuinely relaxed and free from stress, and being positive. Because really, especially as a cancer patient, one of the hardest things I experienced was telling other people that I was ill, to look into the eyes of the people that love you and say, yeah, I have a brain tumor, is really, really hard. It's really, really hard. And it's kind of, what you do with that is you try and make it easier for them. You go, but it's okay because I'm strong, but it's okay because. And I think I had a thought in my mind a lot of while, like when I was after I'd kind of seen that I didn't need to live in the reality that cancer was a bad thing. I didn't need to live in the reality that death was a bad thing. I could actually be okay with all of that. And I was feeling amazing. I felt completely free from my future, from fear. There was just nothing that was getting in the way of me living, which was incredible. But one of the things I found myself saying to a lot of friends and family was that it's okay because it's only under my skin, because it hadn't metastasized to any organs yet at that point. And then I had the brain tumor diagnosis, and I was like, I've got to stop saying that. It's not okay because it's only metastasized to my skin. It's okay because it's what is.
Okay, you need to explain this a little bit more, because I think this is such a pivotal point, isn't it, in what you're saying. And I would imagine for some people it's a little bit hard to grasp. Things like, you know, what do you mean that death isn't a bad thing and cancer isn't a bad thing? And what are you saying here? Surely it is. Surely it's the worst thing in the world. So can you kind of help us understand a bit more about what you mean by that?
Well, I think what we're exposed to, so I'll rewind a bit. When I was pregnant, I was in the States, and I don't trust the medical system in the States whatsoever. And so I researched birth, and I decided to fill my brain with positive birth stories, so that when it came to me giving birth, my reference points weren't all negative, because what we're exposed to in Hollywood movies and people's horror stories about birth is all quite negative. So I wanted to give my body the best chance of birthing a child I could by putting as much happy, positive, life-affirming stories about birth into my head prior to giving birth. So when I got a cancer diagnosis, I did the same thing. I can fill my head with beautiful stories about people that don't die. And looking back, that was really, really helpful. Because what we believe about cancer, what we expose ourselves to around cancer before we get it, tends to just be adverts to raise money for people, which they do a wonderful job. Like it's very emotive to see somebody dying, and so we want to give money, so those adverts work really well. But what it does without us realizing is it creates this image of cancer in our head as being a certain thing. So when we get a diagnosis, we automatically think that that's going to be our reality. And it doesn't need to be. It might be for some people, but it doesn't need to be. And that was a key thing for me, was being able to stop in the moment and not think about what might happen, and not have this constant, I've got a disease in my body that I have to fight. I've got a disease in my body that I have to fight, because that's so stressful and so exhausting. Instead, I was able to relax. I was able to see that whatever I was thinking about it wasn't actually going to help. And it didn't, at the moment that I was sitting there, could be joyful, even though I had cancer. I could enjoy nature. I could enjoy life in the moment, despite the fact it might not go on forever. And, you know, we all walk around in life as if we're going to live forever. And we none of us are. And I just got that in focus, in a very short focus. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question a bit better.
Yeah, and I think
probably gone off on another tangent.
Well, what I think I'm hearing there is there was something about, there was almost like a shift between imagining what things were going to be in your head about your daughter and what might happen and what if I die, to shifting to just being in the here and now. And there's something about that space of the here and now, which sounds to me, I mean, even this sounds like the wrong way to put it. I'd say it's more resourceful, but that sounds like it's a bit worthy. I don't mean it like that at all. It just feels like a more healthy, nourishing space to be present to.
Yeah,
that's what I'm hearing and what you're saying.
Yeah, I think I just didn't. I think I just realized that of everything in my life, there's one thing I can control. I can't control if it's my time. I can be, you know, this idea that if you're enlightened enough, you don't get cancer, is like one of those spiritual things that, like, it really riles me, because it just, people use it to add pressure on themselves, and then it just makes everything worse. But I realized that if I only had 12 months left, I wanted to enjoy every single one of those moments. And the only way I figured out that was possible, and I did this by just trying, just seeing what felt good, seeing what felt like me, seeing what felt like enjoyment. And the thing that did that was being in the moment and having a small child. I mean, when I was in and out of hospital, she was 14 months old. And so, you know, nothing kind of reminds you that there's just now, like kids do. And that was one of the most sort of powerful things that I saw, was I'd spent so much of my life overthinking things, and in an imagined reality, playing out different scenarios, feeling self-conscious, being worried about how things looked or what I was doing, that I'd spent my entire life there. I'd never actually experienced anything cleanly, never really experienced the joy of being alive. And I remember thinking very, very clearly about, I think it was a weekend after. So I got a stage 4 diagnosis and left my husband 4 days later because it was absolute purgatory being in the same space as him. And I thought I was going to have another 12 months. I didn't want to live them in that way. But I remember spending, I think it was the weekend, I think I went and saw family with Ruby and walked up a hill, and I was at the top of this hill, and I just remember thinking, God, I could die tomorrow happy. I would give all of my future for just having that time and having. So when we say cancer's bad, like cancer for me wasn't bad. Yes, the medical procedures are uncomfortable. Yes, there's things that aren't pleasant about it. Of course there are. But for me, it gave me such a perspective that I actually got to enjoy life. I've recovered from what was chronic anxiety, although I never called it that. Literally been anxious my entire life. Had probably what was quite bad postnatal depression, except no one picked up on it because I had cancer. Well, of course, you're sad you've got cancer. But as that got worse, that tipping point gave me everything, gave me depth and joy and colour to life that I didn't know existed before. And I really would have been content to just have one day of that.
I mean, that's extraordinary. The word that comes to mind is almost like that it's a gift. It's a strangely wrapped gift, cancer, but it was almost like a gift in it providing a catalyst for you seeing something different about what it is to be alive.
Yeah. There's this beautiful bit in Anita Moorjani's book, Dying to Be Me, which I read at that time. And she talks about she's died and she's in some limbo land, like her consciousness is with her father, I think. And she talks about having a choice. She was aware that she had a choice whether she came back or not. And I remember there's something about the way that she says it, and I can't remember exactly, but there's something about she could come and live without fear. And I remember feeling that way. If I was going to live in life, I wanted life to feel like a playground. And just not believe any of the other stuff. And I know it can sound a little insane, but when you take away your own ideas about what you want, there isn't anything. No, I'm going to try and articulate this better. When you just hold your desires a little bit more loosely, it's like holding life but without a clenched fist. It's like letting go of everything you think you need and then just playing and just letting yourself be aware of the things that you want and just have that, just do that, just feel the day. It's so hard to put words to.
Well,
stumbling through.
I get that it's hard to put words to because it is hard, and yet there are bits that really land for me. I just scribbled one down that sort of living without fear. I mean, gosh, who wouldn't want to live without fear? It's almost like impossible to imagine a world where people lived without fear. But even that, for me, reflecting on that, what would it be like to live without fear? That's massive.
Yeah.
It's a massive reflection. What would that be like?
I think I experienced it for about 3 months because I just didn't feel there was just no going there in my mind. Every time, the analogy like that I imagine is kind of like, normally when things are a bit bad, we have a little bit of a wallow. So imagine like this, there's the dry land and there's the puddle. And normally if we have a cold or something, we like get in the puddle and we have a bit of a whinge about it, you know, we stomp about. And what I realized was whenever I went onto that side of my brain, it was so deep, I would have drowned. I could get in there and I could have just gone because there was so much. There was a time when I moved into a house on my own, having just had radiotherapy on brain metastases, looking after my child. And my sister rightfully said, "Are you sure you should be doing that? Because you're really quite at high risk for seizures." And I couldn't, if I'd have thought about that, I wouldn't have lived. It would have just been the depths. So it wasn't even, I didn't have room to it felt so incongruent with me living to feel fear that it just didn't exist.
Which kind of goes back to, I think, what we touched on at the beginning of the interview, this sort of, there's a real difference between trying to think, right, and now I'm not going to live without fear, and I'm going to make sure that every moment of the day I practice living without fear, and it becomes a kind of thing, doesn't it? It becomes something we keep banging on our heads. But you're not talking about that.
No.
Saying, in the absence of fear, this is what life turned up. This is how life turned up for me.
Yeah.
It's a different, and that's, for me, is what's so key in what we're talking about. Well, this is my language here. It's like when we experience and when we look for that which is who we truly are, that true essence, unchanging essence of who we are. And we live as humans in this world of thinking and fears and all of that stuff. But when we touch base with that, then there's a naturalness to the way that we turn up in life. Things change naturally, not because we're trying to make them change. And that's what I'm hearing and what you're saying here.
Yeah. I think that listening for that internally is the best guide that I've had through the whole process, an ongoing process. There's been, those times when I was in and out of hospital were a long time ago, but just the beginning of this year, they thought it was in my bones and I had to go for a load of procedures and things. So it's kind of not over. And the best tool that I've got is that listening to me and listening to what that presence, it's listening to that internal guide as to what might be good for me right now. I've just done a little blog on self-care, and it's one of the places I got to see that for myself, where I thought that, I've got to look after myself, I've got to go to a spa like get really stressed out and spend loads more money than I want to, and hang out with somebody that I wasn't necessarily that interested in hanging out with all day, and like it would actually be this expensive, stressful thing that had a couple of nice moments in it, when really what would have been self-care that day would have just been to, pay the bills I needed to pay and get under a blanket. Like that would have been the best thing. And that's the listening. It's not sort of cultivating an idea of this elaborate thing that you need to do. It's just listening. And I had that around early on. Like I was, people suggested diets. I've always been really interested in food, being a chef for years, and people suggested diets and all kinds of things to me when I first got diagnosed. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that wasn't the route for me. Even though it interested me, it felt like pressure, it felt like resistance to go down that route. So I didn't. And I think, so I really hear when you say that internal listening for that internal guide, that you're just really who we are, just actually our our little individual joy inside us, it's really easy. I think I always thought that there was this thing, there's this enlightened state, there's something that I've got to get to, there's some place that's other than here, and really there's not.
Yeah.
There's not. There's just that absolute magnificence of this very moment, and that's it.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying there, because there's, when we do listen in to that truer self, that truer nature, and we're guided by it, then it often is not very elaborate what it turns out we end up doing. Like you say, the spa, health treatment, all these things I should do to feel better, and then it's like, do you know what, I just fancy a duvet day, actually.
Yeah.
That feels right for me. But and also the other thing which I'm hearing is this listening, because there might be people here listening who have got friends or family who have cancer or a serious illness, and they're saying, well, how do you listen for well-being in the other person? And I'd love your take on that, because it's not about trying to G them up with positive thinking. That's not what we're saying here, is it?
Yeah.
But there is something about seeing beyond all these stories to who that person truly is. And I have a way of articulating it, but I'd love to know from you, who's been through the experience and on the receiving end of people who have, with best intentions, wanted to listen to you in the right kind of way. What kind of listening has worked best for you, or interactions have worked best for you?
I think if you can, as a carer, as somebody that loves somebody that has got cancer, I think if you can listen without your own fear, I think some of the most helpful interactions that I had were with people that loved me, but could listen to me without being scared for me. Because when they bring their own fear of their own loss to the table, it's very difficult to I'm an empathic person, so I would naturally go to comforting them, even though I was the one that might die, which is what I think that's a very common thing. So if you can sit in the place in yourself where you just love that person, like how we look at an infant, and you look at a baby and they're just pure. A baby doesn't have to do anything or be anything to be loved. So if you can sit in that place when talking to someone and just see that they're having the perfect experience for them, and it might end with them dying, and it might end with them getting better, and it's not within anyone's conscious control what happens. I mean, apart from maybe some clever drugs, but even the clever drugs don't work sometimes. So I just think sitting in that place where you can hold somebody in a place of love and be brave enough to show up in that place of love to somebody that's suffering it's the most precious and beautiful thing you could do for that person. And I'm so fortunate, and it makes me so emotional thinking about it. I'm so fortunate that I had that, and I think it was pivotal in me seeing the love that exists in myself to see that I didn't have to be all those other things that I thought. To really be like, that was one of the biggest sort of transitions in where I was psychologically, was realizing that I already was enough. It's not even enough. I was already a radiant human being that was just magnificent. And I saw that with the help of other people seeing that with me. So, yeah.
And that magnificence is, in essence, with well-being listening, is what we are looking out for when we listen out, not well, we listen to that within ourselves, and from that space we listen out for that in others. And I just want to say thank you for the way you beautifully expressed that. Absolutely beautiful. And I know you're on a mission. You're on a mission. This thing called cancer came into your world. You didn't particularly want it to come in. It did. It sort of rumbled around. It rumbled around, did what it did. You've learned a lot from it. You're still learning, I know, from I guess I'm kind of reluctant to say the gift that it's given you, but there are gifts I can see that you've taken from this that you feel passionate about. And your whole business now is around supporting others. So just tell us in a nutshell, what is it that you're about, and how might others be helped by you?
Well, I'm about changing the way we're talking about cancer because of the picture that it builds for us in our head. And so my business is twofold. There's a wider conversation about changing how we talk about cancer, with some t-shirts, and one of them's quite funny, and that's to really try and help change it from being a fight. Cancer to me is not a fight. It's a process that we go through. The idea of a fight is that if we try hard enough, somehow we'll win. And I want to get away from people trying at cancer, because it seems to cause more stress than help. And stress is really bad for us. So yeah, there's that side of it. And then the other side of it is running workshops with people to help them see how they don't have to live in their thinking around cancer either. So it's kind of, that's twofold. And
is it mainly for people that have the cancer diagnosis themselves, or do you support those that are carers, or supporting those that do have cancer?
Both. I think that the listening and the conversation around cancer has to come from both people. Like, it's, we live in a world where I think 1 in every 2 people will have cancer at some point in their life. It's a disease that's somehow getting more, not less. And there's people living with long-term cancer, and I'd love to help. I want to write. I've read loads of blogs recently about what not to say to a cancer patient, and they're really cute, but also they're not that helpful because they don't tell you what to say. So I kind of want to write a blog of like how to talk to cancer. But yeah, that's where I am with my project at the moment, and I would appreciate all and any support in those endeavors.
Brilliant. Well, look, your website is proudstore.co.uk. Let me see your t-shirt, because your t-shirt is obviously
one of my products.
Yeah, one of the products that you can buy. And if people wanted to get hold of you on social media, or maybe email you, what's the best way to do that, Sarah?
There's email on the website, there's contact forms on the website, or hello@proudstore.co.uk is my email. I'm also on Instagram, but it's proud written with 2 spaces in between each letter. So it can be a bit of a challenge to find, so I might have to change that. But yeah, that's my current Instagram handle.
But I guess if you go onto the website, you'll have links to Instagram and all your social media. Brilliant. Oh, Sarah, it's been such a delight speaking with you today. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with Sarah Tyers. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.